Good afternoon. My name is Pato Zondi, and it's a great privilege to welcome you to the Sports Science Institute of South Africa's COVID-19 webinar series. We started this webinar series 6 weeks ago as a way to meaningfully engage with our members and broader network on matters related to COVID-19 and the specific impact it has had on us as individuals, as communities, and as a greater global society. It's been a compelling journey of learning, of sharing, and of shifting. Today, we are pleased to partner with the South African Sports Medicine Association and bring you a webinar that will look at the impact of COVID-19 on the sports and fitness sectors in South Africa. There are 3 of us sharing our insights in today's webinar, and I am really pleased to be joined by 2 industry heavyweights, Nikki Cockcroft and Professor John Patricius. Welcome to you both, and thank you very much for joining our platform and joining this conversation. Today's topic is a meaty one, and it's probably more deserving than an hour, but we'll do our best to make the most of the time that we have with you, and here's how we're going to tackle it. I will start the conversation by giving an overview of the impacts that COVID-19 has had on fitness and sports. I'll take a look at some global and local trends, and also give some views on what we need to plan for as we look ahead. I'll hand over to Nikki Cockcroft. She is the Global Chief Marketing and Technology Officer at Virgin Active. And she'll share her insights on the health club experience during and after lockdown. A little bit about Nikki. I met her for the first time this week, and I can confirm that she is a dynamic force, a colorful force. She began her career in the online advertising operations industry. She rose very quickly to the top before starting her first business to Prime Media in the early 2000s. After 10 years with Prime Media, she moved to Woolworths, where she grew their online business into the market leader. Nikki now heads up the technology and marketing globally for Virgin Active Group and is leading a strategy to take the business into the product-led omni-channel future. Thanks for joining us, Nikki. Taking us down the home stretch then, Professor John Patricius will wrap up the session. He and his colleagues have developed a framework that details return to play strategies for different sports in the era of COVID-19. He'll share a high-level view of this framework and also highlight some important health and training considerations as we prepare to return to sport and physical activity. Professor John Patricius has been in sports medicine for more than 25 years. He is an associate professor at the WITS Faculty of Health Sciences and also a director of the WITS Initiative for Sport and Health. He is currently a director at the Waterford Sports Orthopedic Surgery in Johannesburg and a founder and director of Sports Concussion South Africa. He also has a significant footprint and involvement in international concussion advisory bodies. Apart from his clinical interest in concussion, he's also interested in pediatric and aging athletes. He's interested in joint disease and tendinopathy. Dr. Patricius has been a team physician to schools, clubs, provincial and international sports teams in rugby, soccer, cricket, athletics, and basketball, and has also served as past president of the South African Sports Medicine Association twice. We'd like to invite you as an audience to please participate in today's conversation. So if you're joining us from Zoom, please do make use of that Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen and post your questions there. If you're joining us from Facebook, please do post your questions or your comments in the comments bar, and we will address these either in our presentations as we're talking, or of course afterwards in the Q&A session. So let's get straight into it. Now, I'm going to start this conversation by taking a look at how COVID-19 has impacted the world of fitness and sport. I'll speak to what was, what is, and what to expect as we plan ahead. Now, one of the well-known consequences of the pandemic has been the cessation of professional sport, in fact, all sports leagues, and the closure of recreational parks, fitness centers, and other public spaces. These are interventions that were introduced to both limit the spread of the coronavirus, but also to give national authorities time to plan a response and organize infrastructure to effectively deal with the consequences of the pandemic. Now, international organizations and sports federations have shown their solidarity with these efforts. There are examples of FIFA and the International Olympic Committee that have partnered with the World Health Organization on certain projects and campaign in support of limiting the damage that has been caused by this pandemic. Locally, the measures that were introduced by our government when lockdown started were also widely supported by the South African local sports and fitness industries. We understood the need for an initial total shutdown, again, in order to curb the spread of disease, and also certainly to plan a measured and responsible strategy in response to this pandemic. It was a threat at that time, but it still warranted just a time to pause and plan properly. Now, there was never any denial about the significant impact that shutdown and closing and stopping sports, shutting down fitness centers and clubs, there was never any denial about the significant impact that this would have on operations and finances. But there was general acknowledgement and acceptance that this lockdown was the necessary course of action at the time. But of course, Newton's law, for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. I still remember that from high school. And when it comes to physical activity and sport, the consequences of the extended lockdown have been significant. Let's take a look at some figures. Now, prior to the pandemic, the global value of sport was estimated to be approximately $756 billion annually. This number is made up of revenues or from revenues generated from professional sports, which includes things like sponsorship, broadcasting, gate entries, sports retail, and of course, the fitness industry. The cessation of sports and the shutdown of facilities has had ripple effects across all of these sectors. And it has also had an effect on the services that are linked to these sectors. That includes things like travel, tourism, infrastructure, transportation, catering, media broadcasting, amongst others. Now, if this graph that I'm showing you, or this number rather, represents the global annual revenues generated in sport, I thought it would be meaningful to look at specific markets so that we can make it more relatable at a national level. So let's start by looking at one of the major markets, and we'll look at North America and the US. Now, the sports industry in the US is estimated to be at a value of $75 billion. In May, or by May, less than 8 weeks after they shut down sports, and I'm starting my timing when the NBA was announced to be shut down. So 8 weeks after they announced the shutdown of sports, the industry had already lost 11% of their annual revenues. This analysis is done by a market research company, and it was published on the 20th of May. It relies on certain assumptions, but I think it's important to know that it's a conservative estimate. It doesn't include losses from sports such as golf, tennis. It doesn't include losses from several minor sports. It doesn't include losses from gambling. So there are some assumptions that are made here, meaning that this 11% is actually a conservative estimate, this 11% annual loss. Important to also highlight where the loss is coming from. The loss is coming from people no longer attending or spending on professional sports, on tourism, which is a related sector, and a big one obviously is national TV revenue, which includes broadcasting. If we bring it a little bit closer to home, I'd like to present some findings that were published on the 15th of May. And this gives a provisional indication of the local impact that lockdown or the pandemic has had on sport. So this survey was conducted among South Africa's top sports leaders and rights holders, and it targeted specifically the top 3 roles within organizations. And so specifically that would be the chairman, the president, the CEO, in some cases the secretary general. When asked about the economic impact of coronavirus on the sports industry to date, up to 50% anticipated that South Africa had already experienced a 10 billion rand loss. So we are now at the end of week 7, going into week 8. So 8 weeks after lockdown, it is estimated that we have lost about or up to 10 billion rand of revenue. And that's South African rands, I must qualify that, not US dollars. When further probed and when further queried and asked which specific revenue streams had been impacted, the respondents to the survey noted that event income, subscription fee income, and that would be memberships, and grant income were the most significantly impacted revenue streams. Event income obviously speaks to people attending events or games or tournaments. And the reality is this may still be impacted when lockdown eases, because we anticipate that people may be hesitant to fully go back to past behavior. And there's a couple of international surveys that allude to this. Subscription fees, of course, or membership fees, or fees from members of the federations. And again, here, depending on people's appetite to resume sports, this may be impacted. And lastly, there's grant income directly from government. Usually this income is used to support activities like school competitions, activities for national championships, international travel or competitions, and then administration from the federation. Now, while this income has not necessarily been suspended indefinitely, it has been delayed. And of course, there's no guarantee, as government has to look internally within budgets for COVID-19 relief, there's no guarantee that they will get whatever amounts they had budgeted for. So one final then slide on the impact on our industry, and specifically just looking at health clubs. Now, even before governments had announced closure and it issued restrictions, there were some clubs, and the Sports Science Institute is one of them, that were proactive in their approach and started to phase out certain activity before lockdown was announced. Now, other than leaving millions of people with nowhere to work out, what it has done is it's also left owners and club administrators scrambling to stay afloat financially. What we know, observing global trends in this space, is that globally there are already operators who have decided to permanently close. So in other words, the impact of the pandemic of shutdown has been so significant that they cannot afford to reopen once lockdown is lifted. In South Africa, provisional reports are that operators have experienced 50% to 100% revenue loss. There are some operators whose only source of revenue is membership fees. And at a time when people cannot access infrastructure and brick and mortar, that revenue fees have dwindled to nothing. What this has resulted in, of course, is significant cash constraints for these operators. And inevitably, some have had to introduce temporary layoffs, introduce salary reductions, and unfortunately also introduce retrenchments. But as the Chinese say, crisis represents danger, but it also represents opportunity. And what COVID-19 has certainly done is it has forced us to innovate and evolve at an unprecedented rate. Sports Science Institute, like very many other players, and I know that Nikki will speak to what Virgin Active has also done, but like many other players in this field, locally and internationally, we transitioned to a full digital offering almost overnight. And this was really our attempt and our way to make sure that we remain engaged with our members, and also to make sure that we continue to offer them some kind of service and that we remain relevant at this time. So there were programs that we needed to initiate, new things like the webinar series, that were a response to current times and questions or problems that people had now brought on by COVID-19. We form new partnerships to extend our reach. And of course, all of these interventions are in an attempt to remain sustainable. So looking ahead, what can we expect as the sport and fitness industry? Now, by now, you will know that the future will not look like the past. And if you are still holding on to that notion that we're going to go back to the way that things were, I think it's time to let go of that. We need to move on. Things have already started to change, and in some cases, they will not go back. Some key points to consider for the fitness sector post-corona, 3 specific areas really that we know will experience some shifts. That's the overall business economic environment, fitness operators themselves, and certainly the consumer. So to start with the business environment, what we are acutely aware of is that many countries have entered into a recession, may even enter into depression. And so this is going to influence people's disposable income and their spending. I've already mentioned that for some clubs, the impact has been permanent. And so what we anticipate in terms of our overall industry and environment is there are some clubs that will not open. And so we'll see fewer clubs in the space. In terms of the fitness operations themselves, digital developments were already on the radar. But what lockdown did do is it accelerated implementation. And there has been more online activity in these times than ever before. We know that people, because of the environment or operators, will be forced to innovate membership packages. Already we're seeing interesting things that are being offered to members online. Importantly, when the time does come, when we're allowed to open, there will be significant costs to open, because if we are to comply with the hygiene and safety practices that are now mandated by government, this will come at a cost. We will have to introduce increased cleaning, supply of sanitizers, and of course, the physical distancing economy is here to stay. And lastly, the consumer, that's people that are listening, all of us, and I include myself, who consume in the industry of wellness. We have changed. we've adapted. They say it takes 21 days to learn a new habit, and we've had more than 21 days. And the question is, will we revert to our old habits, or do we like what we've been trying out right now and we'd want to actually stay with this new routine? Another important consideration is whether the consumer will trust going back to the spaces that they were used to. I know Nikki's got some interesting insights to share, and we've also seen some things overseas or internationally. There's some consumer market analysis that's been conducted. In some countries, like in the US, you've got up to 60 to 65% of consumers saying, yes, we'll go back to previous habits. But in other countries, for instance, like in the European countries, consumers seem to be a lot more cautious and conservative in their confidence of going back. And as I've already mentioned, we know that the consumer will be more price sensitive. And so we'll have to be creative about how we engage with the consumer. What then about sport? Well, like the fitness industry, our sports sector will also need to adapt in many ways. For a start, if we are to, or when we lift restrictions, we know that initially the sports industry needs to be ready to play without fans. And this does impact their revenue, but that's just the reality. We don't know that we will get the crowds that we used to get. And already there was a challenge around crowds in some of the sporting activities. But we don't know that we will get the crowds that we were used to getting, or that we will be allowed to open for crowds and spectators. The reality is, in South Africa at least, we know that we haven't yet hit our peak. And so we do need to prepare for more outbreaks and understand what our measures, interventions, responses will be as a sporting fraternity. I've pointed out the role that social media has played in ensuring that consumers remain engaged with physical activity and wellness solutions. And perhaps it's an opportunity for the sports industry to also consider the role of social media platforms and how that can take a greater position in terms of the offering and the experience of sports. And I know that there's a couple of sports anchors, for instance, in the South African space at least, who were very quick to jump and to continue their work, which was usually interviewing sports professionals on Instagram and Facebook, and have received great traction. One of the revenue streams that we know have been impacted relates to sponsors and sponsorships, because of course they too, as corporates, have been impacted at this time. And so there will be work that needs to be done in rebuilding these relationships with partners, and perhaps even reviewing your previous relationship, understanding that things may not go back to what they used to be, but regrouping on how you can frame a partnership that is relevant to the times now. And as with any sport, or any industry rather, the question is, how will we evolve to capitalize on the future? We know there's no going back, but there's an opportunity here to use this crisis to evolve. I'm going to leave it there as the foundation being laid for Nikki to take on the baton and head into the next level of discussion.
Thank you so much. That was a great start. And actually, I'm taking notes at a pace here at some extra things I could be thinking about for Virgin Active. But thanks very much for that intro. And I think many of what you described there describes our business exactly, and some of the things that we are seeing and experiencing. I'm going to talk a little bit about Virgin Active during lockdown and after lockdown and what it's meant for us as a business. I look after Virgin Active across all 8 markets. So we really have had the opportunity to see how this all started with our Italian business, which reopened this week on Wednesday. So we watched market by market, one by one, closing down. What started as a conversation at Exco where, you know, we were talking, oh, you know, we've heard about this situation. Is this going to spread? And the time from that conversation to the full estate being locked down was possibly about 2 to 3 weeks. So I think no matter what kind of planning, I think we all had at the start of this a big reality check in how seriously to take it. Where I think we were going into it a bit naive, thinking it was there, okay, and then it just spread really, really quickly. And the Italian business and the Italian community really, really kind of took a massive beating, and it really was quite depressing and very sad what was happening, but we were still watching from afar. And then it spread, and obviously the last country to close down for us was actually South Africa. So it was a very interesting time for us as we went down into closing down our business and dropping by the numbers. And it was, you know, every day we were getting updates of what we needed to do and how quickly we had to close. And as I'm sure most of you know and understand, switching off a business like Virgin Active is not just a power switch at the door, and then you've shut down, you know, an estate of 140 clubs, and it all goes down smoothly. So there was a lot of work into how we switched it off, the timing of everything around the operational, the IT systems, the swimming pools, the air conditioning, et cetera, whilst maintaining the priority that it was, that's the safety and health of our members and our staff was our top priority, and what could we be doing to protect all of those people in this process. As you said, you know, any health club business like ourselves during the lockdown period, the majority of the source of revenue that we take in is from our memberships. And we froze all of our memberships as we went into this. But we do have a massive staff complement in South Africa and in the business in itself, you know, with over 27,000 employees, with our broader reach and extra trainers and everybody else, and, you know, nearly 9,000 in South Africa. So it's been, to describe my personal experience during this lockdown, has been one of very high highs and very low lows. The very high highs are around the opportunities where we've seized digital opportunities and created new products. And the lows have been the economic impact on people, as we've had to go through phone calls and different measures dealing with the staff team and our team, and how this has impacted them personally and their families. And for every very high, there's at least 3 or 4 lows into how real and how serious the impact on our economy has been. So it's been eye-opening, to say the least. And I am confident in saying that Virgin Active will open up again a better business than it ever was before, because it's really created an opportunity, as you say, for us to relook at how we run the business, to relook at how our members experience what is the offering. And to be honest, I think that whilst the consumption of exercise experiences has changed in terms of platform, I can see that humans have not changed. How our customers, their need for exercise, how it impacts the people when they don't get their fix in terms of exercise, myself included. My 4 children want to move me out any moment, and how people are about it. You know, it is for those of us who do exercise every day, having that addiction to kind of taken away is one of the hardest things to deal with, because for people who already exercise, you understand the need to get that release. And to feel that freedom, and isn't that what exercise gives us, amongst many other more medical things, which you guys will talk to. But having that taken away from people, especially where outdoor sport, which has now been brought back, but at the time there was nothing that you could do. And everybody, you know, not everybody in South Africa has massive outdoor space to train in or to make it up. But what I love about South Africans is that it's particularly Buurtmakerplan, and the number of images of Strava drawings of like scribbles of people training around their house to just kind of stay active and keep their mind active was really impressive, and I enjoyed that, as the links that people would go to keep exercising. So in terms of how we kind of engaged with our members during lockdown, is we have created two very strong channels. One is that of a very public channel, introducing lots of online content for people to view. You don't have to be a member, and that speaks more to Virgin Active's purpose, which is to inspire people to live an active life. Whether you're a member or not, we know that exercise can be life-changing, and we also know the impact on this lockdown on the mental state of people, the increase in depression, suicide rate, and all the heartbreak and separation anxiety that is being caused. We know that exercise is a key ingredient to help people get through that. So that has been our focus, from a public sentiment, from a public member, and we've maintained a very positive sentiment in the market generally with the public by providing with as much content, insights, webinars, sports physicians, everybody that we can, to provide you with new kind of information that will enable you to prevent injury at home. How do you eat well? How do you combine the fact that you're in a confined space, but you still need to get your heart rate to a certain percentage in order to get that release, etc. So we've combined exercise experiences to help people stay active with supportive content, And as I said, that's been very well received. We've reached over 500,000 people through different events that we have run that are actively, and we say not just clicking on a video and disappearing. So we talk about 75% completion. So have joined us for over 75% of that content to stay active. We've obviously done all the fun things like competitions and some fun elements, because it wouldn't be Virgin Active if we didn't have some fun exercises, which we very, has been lots of fun and added just a smile on people's faces. One of our values is, and our core business values is to see a smile on people's faces. And even if you're seeing it across the screen, if you can see them enjoying a new yoga move and they're not getting it right, it's not the end of the world. You're having a laugh, you're still getting your exercise. And those have been the uplifting moments when you see people consuming the content, getting involved and really trying to stay active and involving the whole family. In terms of, kind of new technology and stuff, I think all businesses, the entrepreneurial spirit has just kind of come alive in so many of us. And I think for myself, I haven't felt this way and this exuberated about digital transformation. And I've seen some ridiculous memes going, what drove transformation in your business? Was it your CMO, your CIO, or whatever other title? No. Was it COVID? Yes. And I think all of a sudden we were charged with energy, like a fully charged battery, to start rolling out the things that we have been talking about for possibly up to 20 years at Virgin Active, around not just digital content, but improving the bandwidth in our clubs, introducing contactless arrival, making sure that we know at any given time how many people are in our club, making sure that between all the equipment, there's the right amount of space. We've really spent a lot of time thinking through every customer and member interaction we possibly can, in addition to the innovation that you are hopefully seeing come out of Virgin Active through live classes throughout the day, online video on demand, new integration of wearable devices, involving our PTs, doing at-home personal training, doing smaller group training at home, and really finding different ways to keep people active. And that innovation piece has just been so thrilling in terms of what works and what doesn't. The other part of that it has highlighted for me is that as a business, we really do know our stuff when it comes to exercise, and regardless of how people are or which platform they're training on, the human behavior remains exactly the same. So types of things that I'm talking to are how, when you first launch an online product and online videos and online content, and we've got it on television, on DSTV, we've got it on your phone, we've got it everywhere you can think about, is Virgin Active content, which is really exciting. And initially it spiked. So you've got the initial entrance graph really going up. People are looking for it, they're active. But like with exercise anywhere, it starts off with everybody doing it, and then it's how you maintain it. And our goal at Virgin Active, because we know the ingredients of exercise, there are two key ingredients. One is consistency. You've got to train, you've got to form that habit, otherwise you won't reap the benefits. And two is around cross-training and the right combinations of exercise to help you reach your need, goal, or challenge. And how do we combine those and reach people where we can't speak to them to help them reach those goals? So if you've started running again and you've come out of the gates and you've done too much too soon, we know that we need to be talking to you now about additional yoga and grid training so that you can manage the rest of your parts of your body so that you can achieve that. But as we've watched with the exercises, that people struggle to self-motivate and they start to drop off in terms of waking up because there's nobody there. There's no personal trainer. There's nobody to say, go and do this exercise and stick with your videos. And so fulfilling that part has become really part of my personal goal, to make people stay motivated and stay on track. I can even see it. I'm a runner. I run every single day. And from the day on 1st of May, when we started training, what it looked like outside in our 3-hour window to what it looked like this morning is wildly different, where if I see 1 or 2 people in the morning on a 6 o'clock run, it's a lot. So people came out initially all excited, and that's great. But then, as you know, in terms of fitness, you boost up first, but then it actually feels harder as your body starts readjusting to the fitness levels. And some of the disappointing things with exercise, which I know people to get over that hump, specifically speaking to the females out there, we know because we monitor how people's behavior inside the club and all types of training, is that women actually put on weight before they start losing weight. So they've got to get over that hump before the drop happens. And with the majority of women's goals around body conditioning, that we have to try and coach that from the sideline to say, stick with it. We know that this is how the body mass index works, and you're going to get over that hump, but you've got to stay on it. Don't give up. And that's an interesting thing when you're all of a sudden doing it across a screen, and we see why people are desperately looking to come back into the Virgin Active physical estate. So just staying on that a little bit, some of the fun things that we've seen: a massive spike in yoga, Pilates, and meditation, partly driven obviously by the need for people to find healthy mind and healthy body, and combine that through. And the other reason we have found out since in a survey, which I love the most, is that people do not enjoy looking like a pupil in the club when everybody else is watching them and they've got to come in and do that yoga move and everybody can see that you haven't done it before. So it's reduced that intimidation barrier altogether, and people are now trying different types of exercise experiences where they don't, they don't feel embarrassed and try and hide at the back of the class or whatever it is. In fact, book a class and don't show up. So we've really enjoyed welcoming people into what Virgin Active has to offer beyond the strength floor and our cardio areas. And it's really been phenomenal to see that our most consumed content is in that genre of content. And as I say, speaks to the mind, the headspace, and it also speaks to just how big that intimidation factor can be inside of a gym. So moving on from talking about during lockdown, I just want to talk about life after lockdown. I think we can safely say that for anybody who thinks that it is the end of the physical world of gyms, they are incorrect. Just like when e-commerce launched in retail, people used to say to me, online retail will replace the physical store. And I was like, that's never going to happen. People need a feel touch environment. And I say the same in terms of a physical training environment. People need a sense of community. People need to feel motivated by their peers. They need to be an environment that is carefully curated to stimulate exercise, like at Virgin Active Sports Science Institute, where everything is thought through, from the temperature control to who's training, to the timetabling, to the programming of that class, to the combination of the exercises that you need to do to reach your goal. And in some of the surveys that we have run, if we opened our doors tomorrow in whichever level, we know that we would have, potentially 60% of our base interested in returning to Virgin Active right now as it stands today, without the full knowledge of the different things that we have put in place to ensure a safe place to train on opening. We this week, as I mentioned earlier, have opened up Italy and Airport Junction in Botswana. We opened this morning. And I would say that people arrived, which was a massive sense of relief. I have to say that even somebody arrived. So people arrived, and that was really exciting. But again, we're going to see the initial interest is a bit slow, but as per our international counterparts, we expect it to fully explode after 2 weeks. Just in terms of some of the things that Virgin Active is doing when we reopen, we're just reorganizing our equipment space. We are ensuring social distancing throughout the clubs. We have got additional hygiene running throughout the day. We are screening all of our staff throughout the day. We have additional sanitizer and all the things that Patu spoke to earlier. And I think the most important, or one of the most important features, is that we have increased our fresh air that is filtered throughout the club. So essentially we do a full 100% air exchange every 6 minutes in the club, so that we are making sure that it's a 100% safe environment. And I think that, I look forward to seeing everybody there. And I think the professor, which is, is much more important than me and much more medical advice than me, is going to talk more about the medical side of during and post lockdown. So over to you, John.
Right, is that up there? Can everyone hear me? Is that projecting? Okay, good. So thank you very much for the invitation. So nice to partner with Sports Science Institute, SASMA, Virgin Active, great partners, and thank you very much for 2 great introductory talks. My brief is really to look at some of the more medical aspects of what we're going through and how our response to that might look in the coming months. And so I'm going to start by covering a couple of medical aspects, and you're probably a little bit feeling like this at the moment in terms of the overexposure to corona type information. And hopefully in one small way, we'll be able to clear some of that clutter in the coming minutes and go through a couple of slides. So I want to start off with this slide just to show you where we are at the moment. And South Africa is in a very different place to many other countries. So if you look at this recently released graph from a few days ago, you'll see that some countries such as Taiwan and Australia and New Zealand have peaked, have come down, and are almost getting on with things in terms of their activities coming out of a lockdown. And although we've come out of a hard lockdown and we're in a slightly less severe lockdown, our trajectory in pink here is continuing upwards, and it's continuing upwards in terms of numbers of COVID-19 cases at an increased incline, and we're going to have to get ready to reach our peak still. And so the message from this is that the danger is still out there, and we need to strategize to be able to exercise in this environment that is risky. And so we need to have the right sort of approach to it from a medical point of view. I'm going to not make this a very medical talk, but I do need to cover a couple of things, and that is talk a little bit about what we're dealing with, because sometimes going back to basics helps explain some of our reactions to this current situation. So we're really dealing with an infection from a virus. Now, viruses come in different shapes and forms, and we know of many of those that are around us and that we've been exposed to in the past, and here are some of them, and they look quite different. What's interesting about a virus is it's actually useless unless it's in a living thing. Once a virus gets into the body, that's when it becomes dangerous. So they're not actually inherently live entities. They're really just entities that exist until they get into our bodies and then use our bodies to become dangerous and exert their effect. And they exert their effects in different ways and on different systems. And as you know, this is the coronavirus. It's the SARS-CoV-2 is the name of this virus. It's a form of coronavirus because it looks like a crown, and the actual disease it gives rise to is called COVID-19. Now, there are 2 important aspects to any viral infection. One is its infectivity. How easily is it transmitted? And the other is the severity of the infection. So what's quite interesting about the SARS-CoV-2 virus is that it is pretty infective. In other words, if you're exposed to it, you're likely to be infected. But its severity is sort of middle of the road. It's not the most severe virus, like something like Ebola, which has a 50% mortality rate. 50% of the people that contract it die. And it's not as light as a common cold. It's somewhere in between, which makes it actually quite dangerous because you can contract the disease quite easily. And because you're not likely to die from it, only a very small number die from it, you're actually going to pass it on. And that increases the chances of it spreading. And under an electron microscope, it looks like that. We know the stylized version we've become accustomed to. But I want to point out a couple of important aspects to this particular virus. So the one is the RNA genome, which is really the genetic material. And that's the key aspect, because once that gets into the body, it replicates, and that's what creates more and more viruses, billions of viruses that can actually cause damage, in this case, to the respiratory system. The other is this envelope. The surrounding envelope of this particular virus is made of lipid fats. And that explains why you need soap and water to get rid of it. Simple soap and water dissolves the fat, breaks down the virus, the genetic material escapes, and it becomes useless. And so we come back to basics again. Using soap and water is probably the most effective defense we have against SARS-CoV-2. And so it's very, very important not to forget that. And that comes back to basic biology. And the third thing I want to mention about the features of this virus are this spike glycoprotein. This spike is how it actually gets into the cells, attaches to the cell receptors. Glycoprotein means it's made of a combination of a protein and a sugar. And this particular sugar is quite sticky. So it sticks to the cells easily. And that's why it becomes quite easy to be infected by this, because the cells attach to it quite easily. So that's some basic biology. Then I want to move on now to how our bodies respond to it. And this is going to be the gist of my talk, is talking a little bit to how our bodies react to the virus and try and fight it off. So when we look at the human immune system, it consists of a number of cells. Now, don't worry about the complex names here. What I want you to look at are these diagrams where we have what we call an innate immune system. We have cells ready in our immune system and in our blood, ready to eat up foreign pathogens. So something that's not recognized as being part of the body, they're literally eaten up. And it's a highly effective system that's there ready to tackle anything that's foreign to our body. And not only do we have a system in place, but we have a communication system. So various chemicals called cytokines or chemokines, which initiate an inflammatory response mediated by these chemicals, which basically recruit more of these cells to come and fight off this foreign pathogen, or this virus in this case. So we have cells ready and waiting. We have a communication system that brings more cells to the areas that need to then attach to these viruses and actually literally eat them up through the communication via these chemicals. We then have a second layer or second tier of an immune system, which is an adaptive immune system. Now, this is not a generalized immune response. It's a very specific immune response. So in this case, we identify SARS-CoV-2 as a new virus, and we need to generate a new specific response. And we do this via antibodies. You will have read a lot about antibody testing. So these are the layers of the immune system that actually tackle the specific virus. They're puzzle pieces that fit onto that virus specifically. They're custom designed, and they actually neutralize that virus. But this takes days or weeks to actually formulate this response. So I just wanted to mention that there is this very, very structured response that is generalized in the beginning and becomes more and more specific as the virus spends more time in our body. The other important aspect is that our immune system then has a memory. We maintain the antibodies to fight this particular virus, and that's why you shouldn't really be contracting that particular illness again once you've been exposed and overcome it, because you have that specific immune response that's been developed. So I want to move on to exercise, because that's the theme of today's webinar. So we've got this immune system, and we have exercise as a tool to promote health and to fight disease. And I want to try and get that point across. And we know, all of us that exercise and that promote exercise, we know that exercise has huge benefits. It has cognitive benefits. Exercise actually makes you cleverer. And there's good evidence that shows that kids' maths marks, for instance, are better if they exercise. Nikki spoke to us being social beings, the social benefits of exercise. And it's something that we depend on. We love team sports. We love being in the gym with other people, in classes, etc. We also know that there's a huge emotional benefit to exercise. You feel better when you exercise. And in a situation where we lock down, where we're in our homes, we need to use whatever tools we have to boost our emotions, to make sure we're not in a depressed state. And then, of course, the physical benefits of exercise in terms of maintaining ideal body mass, in terms of muscle strength, flexibility, cardiovascular fitness, etc. All absolutely essential in terms of maintaining health. So we know about those. Perhaps what's less well promoted are the benefits to the immune system. And I want to talk to that a little bit. What are they? Well, you get an improved exchange of what we call the innate immune cells. Those cells that I mentioned that are ready and waiting for any foreign body that comes into the system. We get, when we exercise, an increased blood flow and an increased exchange of these cells between the lymphatic, the immune system, and the blood. So they circulate more efficiently, which obviously makes that system more efficient in targeting those viruses. And the more you exercise, the greater the cumulative effect, the greater the efficiency of this system in countering the viruses. The research shows us a 40 to 50% decrease in susceptibility to upper respiratory tract infections, colds, flus, etc., sore throats, those sort of things. You're probably up to 50% less likely to get them if you exercise regularly. That's massive. Lower death rate if you do contract flu and pneumonia. And remember that pneumonia and flu kill a significant number of the population every year, particularly every winter. So if you can exercise and build up a layer of immunity to prevent that, it's going to help. Enhanced response to vaccinations. We all know how we're encouraged to have flu vaccinations. If you exercise regularly, your body's immune response to those vaccinations is more efficient. And then we know when we age, most systems decline, and the immune system is no different. So you get this concept of what we call immunosenescence, which really means that the immune system with age becomes less efficient. And if you exercise into age, then this process takes a lot longer. And so you delay the onset of deterioration. And then very importantly, the immune system's response is even better in those people who are compromised by things like obesity, high blood pressure, diabetes, and cardiac disease. Very, very important. Because, and I've circled these points, because if we look at these points, this is exactly the scenario that we're dealing with at the moment. Viral infections which enter through the respiratory tract cause pneumonia and affect the aging, obese, hypertensive, diabetic, and cardiac populations. And so in my mind, exercise, which boosts all of these aspects in terms of fighting diseases, is the most important weapon, together with washing our hands, that we have to help succumb to this virus. And if you're medically or scientifically inclined and you want to read an outstanding systematic review on the effect of the immune system, there's a reference which highlights a lot of these points. So at WITS, the WITS Institute for Sport and Health, we had a paper published this week which really promotes this message, that exercise, no matter who you are, no matter how wealthy, how poor you are, no matter what your resources, no matter what your state of health, is the most effective way of countering illness. And we've stressed 6 points. One is ongoing hygiene. Nikki asked the question, what are we going to take forward from COVID-19? And our hygiene practices are one of those. We're going to be washing our hands a lot more. We're going to have alcohol sanitizer available in any public space. So that's one thing that we've emphasized. The second is that we need to avail and marshal public spaces better. We can't have crowds exercising in the same space over a short period of time. We need to be able to use the policing system, the army, to marshal those public spaces to allow for people to exercise more. We need more exercise time. 3 hours in the beginning of the day, particularly when we're going back to school and work, is not sufficient. We need to be able to promote the return of sports that I've labeled here physically distanced. Things like golf, playing singles tennis, swimming in lanes, swimming pools, etc. We've got to be a bit more sophisticated in how we promote return to sport. And those sports where we have the opportunity to maintain a physical distance, we should allow participation in. We're starting to get back to school. We need to guide schools. How can they incorporate physical education into this new world of these? And then finally, we need to look at, exactly as Pato mentioned, how do we have a strategy to get back to team sport in this new world of ours? So let's go back to our homes, because that's where it all started. So our advice is quite simple. There's a lot of information out there. So you've got to stay fit at home. and you've got to eat healthy at home, which in my house has become a lot more difficult, because when you're at home, the fridge and the pantry always seem to be close at hand. And so one way of staying away from them is obviously to exercise. And we encourage people to use those 3 hours. They've been given to us. Get out, use them, avoid that sort of caged up feeling, and try and get out and use those 3 hours. But at other times, use your home, your garden, your balcony, whatever space you have. We've heard about the technology, a monumental, exponential increase in technology that's available to us. Use it. And you will hear these refrains of 3 to 5 times a week, exercise on most days, about 30 minutes. I'm going to turn that on its head and say that you should be exercising every single day. In this situation, you should be exercising more than once a day, and you should be varying your exercise. Do some cardiac type exercise at some time. Do some flexibility and strength work at other times. But utilize this time that we have to incorporate more exercise every single day into your routine, no matter who you are. So we've got all the technology, and really, it's quite astounding what's available to us, whether you do it by yourself or you do it in classes, the type of technology that's out there that provides the variety. And as we've heard, Virgin's been a leader in this in terms of promoting some of those activities online and turning their model upside down. Utilize what's available. A lot of it is free. Finally, professional sport, a lot more difficult to tackle, and Patu's mentioned some of those very challenging aspects to it. Some of those include exposure of our athletes, exposure of us, the teams, the support teams attached to those athletes, and exposure of their families. Crowds, obviously something to deal with, but probably easy. We're going to just leave them out of the equation for now. The environment that they train in, that they stay in, that they compete in. How do you deal with athletes who have been infected with COVID-19? How do we guide them back to sport? And remember that after a long layoff, your injury risk is higher. So how do we mitigate against that? So those are the sort of aspects we're putting into our formulas to guide athletes back. And if you read what's going on, I don't think there's been a greater response over a shorter period of time in any aspect of sports medicine than there has been to guiding our athletes back to sport. These are some examples of documents that have come out in the last 2 weeks from overseas agencies. And I know Patu's been involved in a lot of the local discussions in terms of guiding sports like rugby, like soccer, back into the professional fold. And a huge amount of collaboration from a number of our colleagues that are really working very hard to guide our athletes back. And they center around these key aspects. The first is what we call a bio bubble, or a biologically safe environment, a BSE, which is really a bubble that you put the athletes into for a period of time while we initiate this return to competition. This is an environment that's screened, environment where nobody enters and leaves without being screened, and only the essential people involved in a return to sport process are part of this. And essentially all those people need to be screened so that they're free of COVID-19, and we don't allow the potential for infection to enter in there. So that means living in, for instance, a hotel that's isolated, training in an isolated environment, and competing in an isolated environment that nobody enters into. Aspects that are important are screening people entering into that environment, screening them while they're in the environment, and monitoring them from a health perspective, both physical and mental health while they're in there. So it's an extremely involved and complex system that we're going into to reintroduce professional sport. And it's something that we are not used to and going to have to learn a lot about as we enter into that. So to end off a little bit about what the Wits Institute of Sport and Health WISH has been involved in, and that is trying to help you at whatever level of sport you're involved in to get back to sport. So we've produced 2 guidelines which you can Google. If you go to wish.wits, Google wish.wits, you'll come up with the WISH website. Go to Staying Active During Lockdown, and there are 2 documents which we hope you'll find useful. One is the WISH COVID-19 and Sport Guidelines general guidelines about what to do to maintain health over this period and why we do that. And the second document is risk reduction and stratification for sport and exercise, where we've looked at the government's return to activity levels in terms of risk, 5 down to 1, and we've really married levels of exercise according to those guidelines. Obviously, we have to obey what the government's telling us, and we're waiting for their next guidelines, but we think these are sensible return to sport guidelines based on what government is trying to achieve. So just to sum up, exercise is appropriate in all people, in all situations, at all times. It doesn't matter who you are, exercise has benefits in so many spheres, not least of which is the immune system. Exercise is especially beneficial if you fall into that vulnerable age group. You're elderly, you're obese, you have some sort of chronic health issue. And if you're potentially exposed to a virus, you're going to be better off if you've been exercising regularly. And we probably underestimate the effects of exercise on the immune system. It is very important, whoever we are, that we facilitate exercise and sport responsibly in our environment, whether that's in the home, whether it's in your community, whether it's in your school as you return, your university, your club, or your professional environment. We're all working hard to be able to do that. And hopefully as professionals, we can work together with you to guide that process. I'm going to wrap it up there. There have been some questions that have come through, and we're certainly happy to take those. So thanks for the opportunity, and let's keep exercising.
Thank you very much to both Nikki and John for those really valuable insights. There are a few questions that have come in, and some of them we've answered directly because I was aware of time, but I'm going to take just 2 questions which I thought were particularly valuable questions to share with the audience. So question to you, Nikki, specifically, just to give an indication of the procedures that have been outlined for gyms, should somebody in the facility test positive, whether it's a member or a staff member. So I'm going to ask you to unmute your button, and if you can just keep your answer brief so that I can take one more question to John.
Sure. I'll speed through in the interest of time. I think most of the precaution is taking up into the pre-build of arrival. So obviously we're screening all staff and everybody who comes into the club. And there's an extensive screening process that happens throughout the day. That in addition with all the precautions around additional areas for sanitizing, washing hands, as described by John, just using proper soap and water. The objective of some of our technology to ensure that people can come through in a contactless environment using a dynamic QR code, and also indicating that one of the key objectives there is contact tracing, and we are able to now narrow it down to a very short space of time of exactly who that person was in contact with, whether that be a staff or member, and then react from there. So it's about providing the most accurate data in the most immediate time around when that person was in the club. I think, debate around whether to shut down your retail or outlet or club 4 or 5 days after somebody has said that somebody did something. By that stage, you've deep cleaned extensively to up to 7 or 8 times a day. So I'm not sure about that approach, but I think making sure that we can do the contact tracing is our main objective.
Absolutely, and I'll just confirm that really it's education, screening before people arrive. Facilities have the right of refusal. Surveillance is really important, so that being able to track where the member was, when they came in, how long they were there, and what equipment they used is an important part. And of course, contact tracing and notifying afterwards. Whether or not a facility shut down is quite specific. John, one question for you, and then I'm actually going to wrap up, unfortunately. Most of them have been answered, though, during the talks. I think it's a valuable question. A question from Tato Motlabane asking about exercise and the relationship with an increased risk, in other words, immunodepression after prolonged exercise. And perhaps that wasn't how the question was framed, but that really alludes to the answer. So aren't you temporarily actually immunocompromised?
Yeah, I think that's very good. Can training too often and too hard actually lower your immune system? And the answer is probably yes, but it's related to your levels of adaptation. So if you're a professional athlete and you're used to training at those levels, it's unlikely to compromise your immune system. But if you're someone who has now free time on your hand and you suddenly step it up and you're training for 3 or 4 hours a day at a high intensity, yes, like everything, like your muscles will ache and your tendons will suffer, so will your immune system. So you need to build up slowly in slower increments, about 10% per week in terms of duration and intensity, and you need to build recovery into the system as well. So that means lower intensity sessions and some rest as well. So that in summary, that's a nutshell.
Thank you very much, John. What I will encourage you to do, if you have further questions or comments, perhaps post them on Facebook, because we can still come back to those after the time. And I will ask both Nikki and John to just spend a little bit of time on our Facebook page and address some of those questions to the audience. And in that way, at least we'll be able to engage with you. But in wrapping up, I do want to say that the sports sector, including those who have dedicated their lives and their businesses to promoting health through physical activity, we are extremely worried about the well-being of people affected by the pandemic. The industry's economic and social strengths as a tool to tackle the economic crisis caused by COVID-19 should not be underestimated. Dr. Patricius and Nikki Cockcroft have highlighted really how physical activity and sport can contribute to people's health, to socialism, to education, and to a general sense of well-being. And in these ways, sport and physical activity can help individuals and societies soften the negative effects of the pandemic. We're eager to make a contribution to the revival of what was once considered a normal way of life, or to shaping what we will see as a new way of life. So to the panelists, Nikki and John, thank you very much for initiating an excellent conversation today. Like I said, it was worthy of more than an hour. And thank you to the participants for engaging and for fielding your questions. Next week, we end our COVID-19 webinar series, and we're going to end it with a view from the front line. So we've invited 4 frontline workers to share their experiences, their harsh realities, and of course, the stories of hope. Please do join us as we close off what has been a remarkable journey of learning and sharing. Once again, thank you to the panelists for joining us in this conversation, and definitely thank you too to the participants. From me, it's goodbye and take care. See you next week. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.